The census numbers are there, so we heard it loud and clear. That's not changing. The projections are showing, and depending on what report you look at, 2013 or 2050, somewhere in between that, America will be majority minority. That's the reality. In cities like here, New York City, I mean, you can see it in the streets. 1 out of every 3 people in New York is Hispanic, in case you were wondering, or of Hispanic descent. And back to the Latino statistics, you know, 62% of Latinos are US born, so discounting that, you know, myth of immigration and all the double fencing we hear these days in the world of politics. But if that is the reality, that's not just a production, that's today, and we're here in New York, Mecca and capital of diversity. Why don't we see more of us on those screens and in mass media representing that voice? I know, you know, David, you're getting through and influencing programming. We're definitely seeing special features that are serious, that are big, that get a lot of attention from CNN. Anybody can answer, but why is it? It feels like we're falling behind with those faces and voices that are truly mainstream influencers and opinion leaders.
Well, I think it's going to take some time. You know, I think you are starting to see, you know, some changes. I mean, I just finished. I was talking to Geraldine, a good friend of ours, is Yvette Molly, and Chris is, she's a friend of Chris as well, who is the VP and executive editor at MSNBC.com, who does a lot of MSNBC, who does, you know, a lot of stuff behind the scenes. So you're starting to see some people, but I think that there are. I think it takes some time. I think, you know, people tend to, particularly behind the scenes, people tend to hire people that they are close to, and people who look like them, and people that they can relate to. And unfortunately, there aren't, or there traditionally hasn't been a lot of us in those positions of power. And it's starting to change. I mean, it's one of the reasons why when you come to the Griot, look, when I started at CBS News back in 1999, you know, I was probably one of two black males under the age of maybe 35 and 40. There weren't any black males around. And I had some pretty tough experiences because of it. And so when it came time to start hiring at the Griot, I said, well, I want to make sure I give black men an opportunity to work in journalism. I mean, you don't see a lot of us behind the scenes. You don't see a lot of us in front of the cameras either. But so I think it's going to take some time for more people like us to get in positions of power where we start to say, you know what, I'm going to give this brother, this sister a shot. And I think it's going to, you know, it's not going to be easy. I think, you know, there's always going to be resistance to change. But again, I don't think you can sort of fight a tidal wave. You talked about the census numbers, and I think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to fight it. But ultimately, I think it's going to have to change. If you are going to deal with a changing world, your newsroom is going to have to reflect that world in order to understand what's going on outside. And I think that's what you're starting to see. More people are starting to say, you know what, I need to hire a Hispanic, you know, or a Hispanic male to understand what's going on with Hispanic males or Latino men. I need to hire a black female if I want to understand what's going on with black women. And so I think you're going to start to see that eventually.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's a matter of survival for major media organizations to adjust and be able to reflect, to understand and reflect the concerns of a changing America, a changing demographic audience. One of the things that really struck me, like last year, the Association of Newspapers in the United States does every year, they do a census, a diversity census of journalists in the newsrooms in newspapers, right? And they just, this last year's census showed that 5% of reporters working in newsrooms across America are minorities. 5%.
That's all ethnic minorities.
All minorities together, 5% to report on a country that's over a third minority. Now that, and then one wonders, this isn't much mentioned, but I think one should raise it, why newspapers have lost, in many respects, have lost a sense of their audience and a voice that finds resonance among their audience. I think companies need to change for their own sort of like survival and good. And the smart companies recognize that and will make measures to change.
But the discouraging thing about that is you're finding, and I don't name any names, a lot of new media companies.
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
Having the same types of hiring practices as old media.
That's absolutely
There's a report about that.
Yes.
There's some big news, websites that a lot of us go to. If you had to look at, and the interesting thing is, they're not held to the same standards as some of these old media properties. They're not held to the same standards as some of these newspapers are. So that's the one scary thing when you look at new media, because a lot of new media companies are actually getting away with having poor diversity hiring practices.
That's absolutely correct. And new media is failing our audiences in much the same way that older media did. That's right.
True.
So I can only imagine what's going through your heads over here. New York, very diverse. I see a lot of faces here that probably are taking the mental note inside. Good. I got a job for a while. But for those that are not
Can I just say something about that, though?
colored,
No, you still have to be good.
there you go.
I mean, you
Thank
still
you.
have to.
It's not a token,
and
right?
you still have to be amazing, actually. It's not enough to get in the door. Once you get in the door, it's time to excel. And then once you get promoted, it's not time to kick up your feet. I mean, I know Alberto doesn't kick up his feet on his desk when he goes into work, and David, nobody does. That's when it's time to actually. I mean, we would be doing a disservice not only to ourselves and to our colleagues, but to our audience if we then just coasted because hey, we now have a site. You have to be better.
But can I add one more?
Of course.
It's interesting. We absolutely have to be talented and often more talented. But to also build on that, there is a funnel effect. There are, and this is true for all industries, that there are going to be more people of color in entry-level positions. But when the industry is shrinking, as it is now, broadcast is shrinking, broadcast news. What happens is the people who are first fired, as you know, are the last hired. And so the people who are in middle management become less diverse. The people in upper management are even less diverse because it takes years to go from that entry-level position to a senior-level position. And I know that the affinity news organizations, all of them are struggling with these issues and they're trying to address them. How do we keep these pipelines open and keep these jobs, keep people in these jobs until they can get to those middle and upper management positions as the industry shrinks? And it's a conundrum, but it's also a reality. So this 5% is real, but there's a reason that there's a 5%.
Okay. So go ahead, Alberto.
Partly, to be honest, partly that's good for sites and projects like ours, because we're paying attention. The less, the less other people pay attention to issues of our community, the more chance we have to really go in there and make a noise. Now, it's bad for the community. I think, like Chris was saying, I think, we need more sites like ours. We need more the more journalism, the better. And competition is good, because what we're doing is really telling stories for communities that really need and can really use good journalism.
This is one other thing, because we talk about niche sites, and I think this is a very important site. I mean, important aspect about our site. A lot of people will be surprised to find out that about 40% of our traffic is non-African American. It's white. 40% of our traffic. And so, I always say that, we're not just serving the African American community, we're serving America, because the interesting thing is, it's not just African Americans who are interested in stories or perspectives from the African American community. It's white Americans, and it's Latino Americans. So, you know, I think it's also, you know, it's one thing, we are serving our community, but we're also serving the country by providing the rest of America an insight into what goes on in the hearts and the minds of our communities.
Because Whitney Houston dies.
Yes.
You'll go to CNN.com, you'll check another mainstream media, but you actually might want to know what the Grio's saying about it too.
Yep.
And that's why these niche community blogs are necessary.
That America will be majority minority. That's the reality. In cities like here, New York City, I mean, you can see it in the streets. 1 out of every 3 people in New York is Hispanic, in case you were wondering, or of Hispanic descent. And back to the Latino statistics, you know, 62% of Latinos are US born, so anybody can answer, but why is it? It feels like we're falling behind with those faces and voices that are truly mainstream influencers and opinion leaders.
Well, I think it's going to take some time. You know, I think you are starting to see, you know,
us on those screens and in mass media representing that voice. I know, you know, David, you're getting through an influencing programming. We're definitely seeing special features that are serious, that are big, that get a lot of attention from CNN. Discounting that, you know, myth of immigration and all the double fencing we hear these days in the world of politics. But if that is the reality, that's not just a production, that's today, and we're here in New York, Mecca and capital of diversity. Why don't we see more of the census numbers are there, so we heard it loud and clear. That's not changing, the projections are showing, and depending on what report you look at, 2013 or 2050, somewhere in between